of the things I love about it being summertime is that I don't have to wake up in the morning, even though I naturally wake up every day at 5:30 in the morning. And it's like super annoying, but just knowing that I can, if I want to, go onto my couch and just go to sleep for like another 2 hours and not have to start drill sergeanting my kids in the morning is the best feeling ever.
Okay, so clearly you guys don't do swim team, dive team, the things where you have to be up early in the morning.
No, the first question I ask when my kids want to do something is, when is the practice and what do they expect of the moms of the team?
Yeah, like how early do we have to be up here?
Yeah, how early and how late? I can do stuff late, no problem. My kids melt down. And my kids can do stuff early, no problem. But I'm like, do you need a mom? Like, how important is the mom to this team?
I totally see that. See, I've chosen the wrong things. We have dive, which happens in the morning. Wouldn't normally have to be there. We'll talk more, but I do have to be there to regulate my son's blood sugar. And then in the evening, that's when the meets are. So it disrupts your morning. It disrupts your dinner. It's a good thing he likes it.
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of It's Your Time to Shine, a podcast about being a mom in a modern world. My name is Jaspreet Kaur, and with me today is my longtime friend from high school, Mel Worthington, and she is a clean beauty advocate, a family photographer, and just a super mom. How's it going, Mel?
Oh, good. Thanks for that intro. That was kind.
Of course. I can't believe we're seeing each other after so many years. We went to high school together, and most people from high school I have a hard time keeping in touch with just because I'm so far away in Texas. So the fact that we're both here in Virginia, I'm like super stoked to be able to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too, for sure. I think it's really cool that we've reconnected. Yes. Really excited about that.
And our relationship is one of the few examples that I will proudly share with Mark Zuckerberg about Facebook allowing us to reconnect and realize who's cool.
Yeah, that is totally true. That is totally true.
Because I don't know about you, but what has happened to me is like 10 years ago, I started to realize all the weirdos that I knew growing up on Facebook. And then you add to that like one super tense presidential election and everybody comes out of the woodwork.
What is kind of cool is that when looking at who comes up as suggestions for friends and who the people I really like comment on their things, they comment on mine, interestingly, it's people from high school. And sadly, it's a lot of people that I wasn't necessarily close to in high school, but I think as adults, we relate.
Yes.
And and more so than people I went to college with, more so than even people who I just see every day in terms of what we're interested in terms of what we talk about. I think it's really cool that there's been that reconnection with people who grew up around the same place that I did.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Part of it is growing up and having that same connection because being that I'm in Texas now, but I'm like such a Maryland, PG County girl. And just like you are, it's like we crave that authenticity and we crave that realness. When Serial podcast came out the first season, The Case for Adnan Syed, everyone was listening to it. And I would listen to it and everyone was like, oh, isn't this storyline crazy? And like, I just love the accents, like that Baltimore, Mid-Atlantic accent. Like, I miss that. It's like music to my ears. A girl needs to hear a little sound of home,
Yeah.
You and I kind of have gravitated to the same little core group of some fantastic moms and dads that are smart and just funny. And I think like, why wasn't I friends with them in high school? Like, I was kind of friends with them, but why weren't we tight? You know?
You know what? Because I just didn't know who I was. By the way, in a podcast, you can't see how much I'm nodding when Jaspreet is talking. I'm just like, yeah, there's like these huge head nods. I'm like, yeah. I think I was just trying so hard. I was so afraid of myself. I was trying to figure out myself. I didn't. Hindsight's 20/20, right?
Right. Totally.
So I'm glad that, let's just say Facebook is giving me another chance to sort of reconnect. And the other thing is all of us have grown up, right?
Totally. But one thing I remember about you, even when we were younger, is that you always had a sense for justice. And that's something that I tried to cultivate in myself. I think some kids are just born with it, and you're probably one that's born with it. We'd have to get your mom on the podcast one day and ask her about that.
I mean, actually, I just want to ask you about that. Like, what makes you say that? I mean, our own vision of ourselves is so maybe isolated and skewed, but what makes you say that?
I just remember you had a spirit where you would always speak up. Something that Lisa and I have talked about a lot is, although we didn't know it, we were children of immigrants. And I say we didn't know it because our lens is shaped by our own experiences, right? And we don't realize who we are to the world and how the world sees us until we're old enough to kind of experience that through other people's expressions and perspectives. I was a child of immigrants. I've had my mom on the podcast. I've talked about my mom and dad a lot. Being that this is a parenting podcast, I've been reflecting on that a lot. And I got so much from them in terms of how I see the world and my ability to speak up and my drive to really look at the world and say, these are the things that need to be changed and these are the things that need to be different. Tell me a little bit about your background and about your parents as well.
Okay, so my parents are both like about third to fourth generation Polish, and they grew up in the same neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, around the corner from each other. And I mean, just the relationships that their family had prior and after, and even still, it's kind of fascinating to me to marry the person around the corner. My uncle married the girl next door.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah, and I mean, when they went to a private school that was, they spoke Polish in the school.
Oh, wow.
It was a private Catholic school. And it's funny, it's always been the threat growing up is that if my sister and I weren't good, you know, they were going to send us to siostra, to the Polish nun. But at the same time, you know, it's not like I grew up in a household that spoke Polish, you know, in the way you spoke up in a household where you spoke Punjabi.
Yeah.
And my parents were very, very Americanized. You know, there was no, and being white too. I mean, clearly, okay, I'm white. Yeah. So we fit in very well. Like it was just, no one would know that we had that particular background unless I said something.
Right.
It was very easy to kind of be fluid and, you know, move in and move out. So, you know, my parents' background was blue collar, poor. You know, my dad grew up, his father actually died before he was even born, which is a really strange thing. He was 33, he was in an apartment store, had a stroke.
Oh.
My grandmother didn't know she was pregnant. So there was, I think they had a very joyful but also challenging childhood. Mm-hmm. And they moved to New York City. They did go to college, both of them. They were the first in their family to graduate from high school, much less college.
Oh, wow.
And they both went on to graduate programs. My father went on to get a PhD. So his first teaching job was here in the DC area at Gallaudet University. So that is what brought us to Cheverly.
Wow. That's amazing. I started to hear things that reminded me of other immigrant stories. I know your parents weren't immigrants, but the idea of being the first ones to go to high school and the first ones to go to college. And I grew up, you know, my dad had a white-collar job. My mom had a totally different upbringing. She was married at a very young age. I had told the story. She told the story before. She was engaged when she was 9, got married when she was 15, and lived in such a small village. Her dad had a stroke when she was very young. And in these patriarchal societies, when you're the man of the house is not a strong figure, it affects everything. It affects who wants to ask for your hand in marriage. It affects who will come to your house to invite you to a wedding. I mean, it's a very important aspect of social status. And hearing what you're saying, like your dad growing up without a dad, there's like the first level of obviously that's going to have an effect on a man, right? Not having a man in their life. Mm-hmm. And then there's that second level of like all of the ways that it creeps up into our social statuses and our social structure that can really affect things. So I just think that's fascinating. And I think maybe I'm getting a little bit of insight into perceived you from a justice perspective because I can see how being able to move fluidly in and out of what your privilege might or might not be, that's probably why you're always such a vocal advocate for those of us who look different.
Honestly, it's funny. I mean, people in my life, people of color, friends in my life have always tried to tell me that things are different for me, right? Mm-hmm. Like sometimes most of the time jokingly, sometimes very seriously. And I really don't think I acknowledged that until recently. So to hear you say that you sort of saw justice in me early is almost kind of surprising because I don't feel like I really saw it. And I'm still working on it, working on this woke thing, right? And acknowledging that privilege, particularly knowing that, my parents didn't come from a lot, but there were a lot of opportunities they got because they were fluid.
Right.
And because they were white, outright. So, and they didn't have an accent and they didn't, they had really shed a lot of that identity and they could pick it up when they wanted to.
Right.
And they could drop it when it was convenient to do so. So I think I'm still kind of coming to understand and appreciate really all of that.
And I think that makes sense. And, I've heard that from so I've grown up around a lot of white people. Like, let's just be straight up about it. Growing up as a kid, like when we were going to high school, that was the most diverse experience I've had. because I went to the University of Maryland. What ends up happening when you go to a solid state school like Maryland is there's so much diversity that you can find your own clique. You can find a group of a bunch of Punjabi kids. You can find a group of a bunch of Sikh kids or Asian kids or whatever it is because there's so many of you. And when we moved to Pennsylvania and then later moved to Texas, and now even where I work, I'm pretty much, I'm the only person that wears a turban at my company, which is 32,000 people.
Wow. That
I know of anyway. I'll say that, being around a lot of like white, more typical American generational stories, like yours, where people have been here for 5, 10 generations. I have noticed that we all have privilege. Mm-hmm. Like I have the privilege of my education. I also went on to get a master's degree. My dad had a PhD and he was very well educated. And he was treated differently. He was not treated, and he didn't wear a turban when I was a kid either. So I was treated differently, and I have the ability to be fluid on the spectrum. So hearing you say, like, oh, people have said to you, and I know that your friends love you and they're not calling you out.
No.
But sometimes, people do say things like, oh, well, you have things that, the world is different for you than it is for me. And I'm sure it is. But it's different for me, too. It's different for me because I won't be intimidated by a police officer or a principal. And I won't be intimidated by someone like a city official. Like if I go to vote and someone's like, oh, no, you can't vote, I will speak up for myself. And that's a privilege that I have because of my education. And that's also a privilege that I have because of the confidence that I got because my father was well-educated and respected. And so we had the ability to be fluid too. So we all have that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are definitely different levels of that privilege, right? And kind of going back to, friends sort of bringing it up jokingly, I think that can be actually the awesome thing about comedy is it gives us that opportunity to voice something that's otherwise difficult to voice.
Totally.
In a way that doesn't make someone feel bad or ashamed. So one example was I was talking about having cinnamon-flavored floss.
Okay.
And he was just like, where do you get that? The white people store? Like, they don't sell that at my drugstore. And it was just like, and I was always like, there's no white people store. And so he would come up with all these like
examples?
Crazy things, right, that we had in our house that you get at the white people store.
Yeah. That's awesome. And by the way, it's true. That cinnamon-flavored floss is not sold in my neighborhood.
It's making me wonder now. I mean, I'm pretty sure we went to the same CVS. Where, was there a special section
first
they
of
just
all,
opened
you're shopping
us?
at CVS. You got to go to the gas station to get your floss. What are you talking about?
They sell floss at the gas station. See, there are all these things you don't know when you're white.
No, you don't. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about what life is like for you being a mom because I know that you're a super amazing mom. You have an awesome kiddo, but the journey for you has been so different than the journey has for someone like me. You have 1, I have 3, and you have so many things that you have to think about beyond what some moms have to think about when they wake up every morning.
Truth, yeah. So when my son was 2 years old, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which came as a complete and total surprise. We did not have a family history. It was one of these things where, it was 10 days before Christmas. I almost didn't take him to the doctor, just because it's like, there's no time for this. I've got people coming over.
Oh, wow.
And I'm glad that my mom, did encourage me. But even the doctor didn't think it was diabetes, thought maybe he had some sort of, urinary tract infection because he was just peeing so much. So, yeah, it came as a surprise.
So he had some symptoms that you noticed?
Yeah, but we were so lucky. I mean, kids can get so sick. Mm-hmm. They can present as though they're having the flu with really rapid weight loss.
Okay.
So I often say to people that if they have a kid that, they're sick, but they're not getting better, or they're just like, losing weight rapidly, like they go really fast from being okay to being like just mortally ill, that even if a doctor isn't suggesting it, they should suggest, checking blood sugar. So, but he was happy. He was fine. He was just drinking a bizarre amount of water. Okay. And, he was 2 years old. He's in diapers. I mean, there's no diaper in the world that's going to absorb a full bottle of water before bed. So, I mean, for very obvious reasons, we were trying to hold water back before bed. And he would just cry and scream and cry. And it was the kind of thing where even the grandparents were like, he sure does drink a lot of water.
So his symptoms presented just like an adult with type 2 diabetes, like having the rapid weight loss, drinking a lot of
Well,
water.
he didn't have the weight loss. He didn't have the weight loss. It was really just the water.
Okay.
And but I started thinking, I don't know, there's just something in that like mommy gut that, you know, like
Something's
I don't
off.
know, this is weird. I guess
Yeah.
I should call. My mother-in-law thankfully said something to me and it was like, oh gosh, you know, it's not just me, you know, kind of noticing it.
Yeah.
So I took him to the doctor on a whim, and even the doctor didn't think that's what it was going to be. And I realized, I mean, he was 2 years old, and I don't know why we were trying to potty train at the time. Seems crazy looking back at it. But he used the bathroom twice while we were sitting in like a 30-minute, you know, period of time where we were really waiting for the doctor to come back with test results.
Yeah.
And he walked in and, you know, was like, well, you know, I've called the emergency room, go get some dinner, pack up. You're going to be there for a few days.
Okay.
You know, but he was really surprised. And he told me later, we went for a regular checkup months later, and he's just like, I have been thinking about your family for months because I didn't see it coming. You know, and I might have thought that you were being a little, I don't know.
Overly concerned.
Overprotective, overconcerned. He's like, and I don't know why I haven't sent a card. I don't know why. It just really like there's something. I'm a parent. I'm a father. And there's just something about mother's intuition.
Oh,
and
wow.
I need to be better as a clinician in, you know, honoring that and realizing that's a real thing.
Yeah. That's amazing. And that's why there should be more females that are doctors than males, too.
But everybody has a blind spot, you know, and I think, you know, unfortunately, it's increasingly normal that rates of type 1 diabetes and type 2 are going up in this country, and we don't know why.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard the same thing. And I have, in my husband's family, very high incidence of type 2 diabetes on both his mom's side and his dad's side, which really makes me nervous as I think about the dietary choices that my children make now. But we live in a society where all rewards are freaking donuts.
Oh my God, that's exactly what I was going to ask you, right? I mean, you can do everything you want at home, but then when society brings about something completely different.
Yes.
And it's not just that it's a donut in excess. Like there was a school celebration and they were going to have a popsicle. And I was told about the popsicle, and, you know, we'd planned for the popsicle.
Right.
When my son eats sugar, actually, anytime my son eats anything with carbohydrates, we have to give insulin. So there's that piece of his treatment. So we really have to plan out, like when I send lunch to school, there's a carb count, there's a routine. So, you know, anytime he's getting something that he shouldn't, we have to plan for it. And, you know, he called me up from the nurse's office, like, they're getting seconds and thirds. And I was like, well, you know, we know that there's another celebration later this evening. You know, do you want that treat or do you want this treat? Yeah. And he had to, you know, make that call. Whereas other kids, they don't have to think about that. They're just going to, sure, I'll take second and thirds, and then I'll do the ice cream later, and I'll, you know, have the pretzels in between. And
well, it's funny that you say that because, as you know, and our listeners probably know, I have 3 kids. They're pretty close in age. And because of that, I kind of raised them as a brood. And it's worked, okay?
They're also raising each other in a way that I have a child that doesn't learn from siblings because he doesn't have siblings to learn from.
That's right. And so so we're here at Lisa's house, and they'll ask me, like, oh, Lisa will say, like, hey, do you want to have a cookie? And then they'll come over to me and say, like, hey, can I have a cookie? And it's not because they're 2 years old and they have to ask permission. They've had that habit since they were little, and I haven't. We don't really graduate out of habits very well because I'm like, whatever's working is working. Let's just keep doing it, you know? We fall into these things, whereas I think other moms are probably like, okay, you're 12 now. You don't need to ask me that anymore, right? So my 10-year-old last night was like, hey, can I have a cookie? And I said, yes, but just only have 1 scoop of ice cream because that's a lot of sugar, right? And she's like, okay, fine. And they're used to it because it's me. But when their friends are going crazy at these celebrations, so like this make your own Sunday celebration that they have at school, which for all these other hippie reasons, organic reasons, I'm not a big fan of make your own Sunday. A lot of it is hygienic, you know, if you have this big bowl of M&Ms. And I'm like, you're expecting me to think that 28 kids are going to go through this Sunday line and use that one little plastic teaspoon? No, the world doesn't work that way. The world is gross and icky, okay? So, but I do notice that a lot of our celebrations are tied to sweets.
I feel like because we're so restrictive, that's exactly why my son will always, like, he will never say no. He will always say, can I have more? Can I have, you know, he'll see how far he can push it.
Right.
So I think there's something too, like giving them a little autonomy there or being able to, right? I think ultimately he's going to have to make these choices. You know, I mean, because it's his health and it's his life. And as he grows up, it's not that he can't have treats. It's just that he has to, as we all should, you know, balance what he's eating. Otherwise, insulin just doesn't work. That's sort of the problem of it. So the deal is that every time he eats and there are carbs, what insulin does is that it takes the energy of that like broken down sugar and it pulls them into cells. So when you're adding insulin in artificially, it takes 20 minutes to have any effect, and it peaks about 2 to 3 hours later. So it's like turning the wheel on a car and the car doesn't turn for another 500 feet. Like you're always sort of, and it's a game played in real time. So it sort of depends on what happened before, because activity plays into it, stress levels plays into it. So, you know, your insulin levels are affected by those things too.
Right.
So it's just an extremely complicated game played in real time. Like every 2 hours, we're sort of checking in and making adjustments here and there to either the background insulin he's getting. And the problem is like he really needs to eat every 2 hours. Like he's famished. He was born famished. I don't know why. He's like the most hungry child. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to regulate and through the night. So that's actually been the hardest part, is that his blood sugars get really wonky at night. They take unexpected turns, so we have to monitor carefully. So I'm not sleeping, haven't slept in years really.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's the artificial pancreas can't come out soon enough.
Yeah.
And we're thinking about taking matters into our own hands and maybe hacking his existing insulin pump. And there's a lot of open source software that's been developed to kind of bring about an artificial pancreas or something that works that way prior to FDA approval. So, but you know, it's risky. The problem with this is like, it's risky if we do, it's risky if we don't.
Right.
Because his sugars aren't well regulated, even though we're trying. We're not regulated enough.
Yeah.
To, again, it doesn't mean he's going to have a bad, sickly adulthood. It just, we're trying to reduce the chance of that.
Right.
So, that's the other thing, is like a ton of mommy guilt, right? When things go wrong or his blood sugars are bad, and then it's like, is this what's gonna, you know, take a year off his life or 5 years off his life? Or is this what's gonna like kill his kidneys? Is this what's gonna, you know, take his eyesight? I mean, that's dramatic, right? But, you know, we're so hard on ourselves as parents anyway.
Yeah.
Like, this is like taking it to the nth level, because it really is like, I mean, the boon and the curse is that, you know, I have the reins. I think if you have a child that's going through cancer treatments or something where the doctors, like, you still have to figure out what you think the right doctors are and what the right treatment programs are, but you aren't really in control of treatment. The doctors are, you know, really controlling that entire process. And with something like type 1 and a lot of other chronic illnesses, like, it's in the hands of the caregiver to do it all and to figure it out, and then to talk to the doctors when it's not going well.
Yeah. That's like, I'm tearing up a little bit because I don't want anyone to feel guilt. I feel it all the time. You know, Brene Brown talks about shame versus guilt. And what they found is that people with guilt are much more resilient than people with shame. So welcome to the club. We're going to make it. I don't want anyone to have guilt, especially someone like you, because you're just such an amazing mom. You shouldn't feel that way. I know you know that, but I'm going to say that on the podcast to make it official. But also, I think, like, one of my concerns with diabetes, amongst other ailments that can affect children, and I've said this about mental health too, is like, it is a disease, it's an illness, but it's not treated like cancer. And it's not treated with, you know, we're not having conversations about it, we're not educated about it. And if we were, it would be okay for moms like me who go on my donuts. You've heard my donuts are basically trash rant.
I think we've argued about it, actually.
Yes. And I feel like when I say that, people are like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm anti-sugar because it causes diseases, you know? It causes cancer and it causes other things. I really think, like, it should be a staple conversation. And someone should be able to say, when you fill a piñata up with candy for a birthday party and children dive towards it as if they've never eaten food before, someone should say, hey, guess what? I'm handing out, you know, this drug that's going to affect your child.
But, you know, I want to come back to, like, what you said about sugar as a reward, because I think there's really... Are we allowed to talk about alcohol on this podcast?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I actually think there's a similarity that, you know, we get through the work week as adults. I mean, and I'm just going to admit it, my husband and I do it. Like, we enjoy nothing more than making, one of our like total hipster artisanal cocktails and just decompressing and like downloading the week because, as it's probably the same in your household. Everybody ships passing in the night. You're in, you're out.
Yeah.
So
the ships passing part, yes. The binging on alcohol, no. I feel like I need to just say that in case anyone's wondering.
That's a good thing. That's a really good thing. But I think there's a lot of other Americans like myself who, and there can be other recreational things too, but that, there's sort of this winding up this idea that if you work really hard, you can have that glass of wine, you can have that, for us it's a beer or a cocktail or whatever. And I almost feel like we use sugar the same way with kids. Like if you do that sports thing, if you're running around on the soccer field, it's totally okay to have sugar.
Yeah.
If you're...
First of all, I want to agree with you. You're totally right. And when you don't drink alcohol, like my husband and I don't drink alcohol, what replaces that is other rewards. But it could be like going to dinner, or getting like that slice of cheesecake. Hey, it's a reward. It goes back to either sugar or food or something that gives you pleasure.
Right. Something that just like is an immediate pleasure. Yes. It's like it's immediate and then it's gone.
Yes, exactly.
Or it hurts you the next day.
That's right. It. Yeah. Or you feel terrible 20 minutes later. You're like, why did I do that?
But why are we teaching our kids the same thing?
I don't have the answer, but I have like a hypothesis about it. And I think that this is a very American thing to have this delayed gratification. We feel that if we toil during the week, that we will be rewarded. And it's very much this industrial worker, factory-oriented system of like, wake up, the bell rings, but we have this mentality where we've been conditioned that if we work hard, if we grind, if we hustle, that then we will get a reward. And when we don't get it, we give it to ourselves.
But that it comes across in one way or another. There are also people who binge shop, right?
Yes.
Who get online and just, grab that thing that they've been wanting or that's on sale.
That makes you feel better.
It is. It's a very immediate, like you hit buy button and you're happy and then it comes in the mail and you're happy. Yes. So you can actually get a twofer.
Yeah.
But then like within a few days, it's like, it's okay.
And what I'm learning as I'm getting older and doing a lot more yoga and doing a lot more breathing exercises is that the happiness should always be. And that concept of always being happy and not needing the reward, that's an elusive goal, right? That's the end goal. That's what the Buddha was. And I don't expect any of us to have that. But I try to be really conscious of lifestyle choices and what we're teaching our kids and how we're living. Something that I'll do is like at the end of the evening when homework's done and dinner's done, if it's still light out, I'll be like, let's go outside and ride bikes, Let's go outside and fly kites. And by the way, I do have a question about this saying like, go fly a kite. I would hear people say, go fly a kite. And that was like a diss, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a brilliant idea. Flying kites is so much fun. Like, when next time someone says go fly a kite, I will go do that.
I'll be like, okay, come with me.
Like, if you haven't flown a kite on the windy hills of San Antonio, you have not lived.
Aww. Well, that's an India thing too, man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's totally Punjabi. Like, I'm trying to teach my kids to be Punjabi and, like, have the kite go up and down, which I don't know where I learned it. I just assume it's in my blood.
It's in your blood. Yeah. Like, I'm going to be honest. The kite thing, I get all stressed out. Like, it's going to get caught in, it's one of those things that it should be pleasurable. Yeah. And the fact that it doesn't bring me pleasure makes me angry because I can't quite get it up into the air. I'm not running fast enough. Yeah. It gets caught in a tree once I finally do have it in the air.
Not to get too zen about it, there is something very spiritually satisfying about watching a kite just fly in the wind with no drones operating it, no batteries and nothing else. It's just up there. And it's like something that I can do and then a little kid in Afghanistan can do and then a little kid in China can do. And like, it's like one of those like unifying forces.
The universals. That's how I feel about sailing. That's how I feel about knitting. There are like these ancient things that are perfect.
Yes.
Like they're like you could do some things to make, there are probably like very high-tech materials to make sails out of, but I mean the concept has always been there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this perfect thing.
Right.
That
can connect us and bind us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Generation to generation. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. Going back to like this toiling and rewarding cycle or this like hustle and, reward cycle, I think that we have created this for ourselves and there are a lot of systems that benefit, and one of them is like the capitalistic system to have us drinking alcohol and having us eat sugar, and it's easy. Mm-hmm. You know what's hard? Deep reflective meditation, which also brings lots of joy.
But you know what's also kind of easy, and basically what we're trying to move away from stuff. For why we're kind of an anti-stuff family. And so we're trying to move towards, let's take more vacations. It's not don't spend money. It's not don't have fun. It's not don't reward yourself, but make it, like you said, like go out and ride a bike.
Right.
Just make it experience-based, be it together-based, because that's where I think we feel the most whole. Like it's not from clicking buy and getting that new thing.
Yeah.
Or not in a lasting way.
Right. No, I think that's beautiful. My husband and I have been trying to do that. The pendulum has swung the other way for us because we've done so many experiential things that he and I never had access to because we both grew up like pretty lower middle class. And now we realize when our kids are like, oh, yeah, Greece was cool, but I don't know, Santorini's a little touristy. I'm like, oh, my gosh, no. And so now I tell my kids, like whenever they're like, oh, I want to go to Egypt and see the pyramids, I'm like, save your pennies, babies. Because I want you to see those things, and I hope that you can save up the money to one day go. Whereas before I'd be like, oh, yeah, we should do that, you know? Now I'm like, no, because we are contributing to that same level of entitlement and privilege. And our children, partly because of Amazon and partly because their dad and I have really worked our butts off to save money and to like, work long hours and get that next promotion and whatever it is in that cycle, they don't understand what it's like to not be able to just break something and get a replacement or to just ask for something and have it appear.
So true.
And that's troubling to me as I started the podcast episode off saying like I was a child of immigrants and, I never was able to be like, I want Nikes. My mom bought me Zips,
I remember those first pair of Roos, man. And I do think it's not even a matter of what my parents could afford. It was really what they believed.
Right. That's right.
Similarly, you can't just have these things that don't matter.
Right. And I was talking to one of my friends about the end of school, and she was like, oh, I can't wait to just like get rid of all these backpacks and all these uniforms. And I make my kids use their backpacks for multiple years. And I do it not because we can't afford it. I do it because on principle, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with this backpack.
It's got some dirt on it.
And I wash it.
Right.
But, the thing is like the things that have become normal. And I'm sure a lot of the parents that are listening, or even if you're not parents, will have we have these rituals. And some of them are consumer based. And some of them are like, just what's the norm? You get a new job, you get a new bag. You go to a new school, you get a new bag. You get a new pair of shoes, right? It goes back to like, what is the treat?
Right.
Right? How do we reward ourselves?
Right. Ooh.
Yeah. Okay, so hearing you talk about wanting to take the reins of your son's health is like really intriguing to me. I have parents that are aging. We have our own health issues from time to time. And I have realized that there's like a really fine balance between let the doctors do what they do and recognizing how overwhelmed and under-equipped the medical professionals are and how you do have to kind of demand your own health and your own treatment. And, I talked about this a little bit before when I said, like, there's a privilege in being educated and being able to really take the reins and say, like, no, these are the things that I want to do. And we're lucky we live in an age where information is available to us, right? So my husband is really a big advocate of biotechnology and medical devices. He's always talking about how AI and machine learning can revolutionize, not replace, but revolutionize the role that doctors play in our health. And he has been interested in things like a passive system for insulin delivery and monitoring. Have you guys looked into that at all? And tell me a little bit about what it's like to do that research, being that you're not a medical professional.
There's so much to react to in what you just said. And I do want to say real fast, for the mamas who are out there who are really advocating, and that is what it is. It's like the doctors have one perspective, and like you said, they're very limited in the time that they can spend. Billable hours, like I look at, why would anyone ever be an endocrinologist? It's mostly number crunching, and you don't get paid for any of that. You don't get paid to analyze my numbers. You get paid when I walk in the door. So there's so many, it's such a broken system. And there's, but like you said, we're lucky that we have the ability through things like Facebook to connect with other parents who are going through similar things, to learn about other options, to listen to our mommy guts and our daddy guts, like that thing that's telling us to get a second opinion.
Yeah.
Really, it is a position of advocacy. I have a lot of friends who have kids with autism, and that is like the ultimate position of advocacy that I've that I've seen. And it will go on for life, and it will go on into their adulthood. Like my son, he will never outgrow diabetes, but he will outgrow the need for me to help him with care. And I realize that's a privilege I have, right?
Yes.
So you're talking about how there's these levels of privilege, right?
Right.
So, sorry, I went somewhere with that.
No,
but to answer your question, right now he uses what is FDA approved and the best technology that we've got access to. One is an insulin pump by Insulet that it's tubeless. Unfortunately, we're not having the best experience with it. It fails a lot. We're thinking about a different insulin pump. We also have what's called a continuous glucose monitor, and it helps us with trending. It helps us to know where he is. It's just not totally accurate.
Okay.
What artificial pancreas is it connects those two devices together in some way, and basically with some sort of knowledge of what blood sugar is doing, there are algorithms that can then tell the insulin pump device to release more or less insulin in
as needed.
Right, as needed. That's the basic idea. And then there are all kinds of levels to it. There's another hormone called glucagon that could be introduced into that. I think the technology is really here. Here's the problem. How do you guarantee a computer won't fail? You can't.
Right.
And that's why I think that's really what's holding up the process, because once you take the accountability away and having to look at these devices and look at these monitors, if it fails, it could be catastrophic. I mean, it could fail spectacularly. So that's sort of the big concern. With people who are looping right now, and again, these are people who are sort of overtaking the functions of their insulin pumps and keying their CGM in and using open source software and contributing to feedback to make it more powerful, more useful, more safe. That's a possibility for us. It's just, if it's working really well and we turn our heads and he's only 9 and he doesn't know.
Right.
Again, it could fail spectacularly.
Yeah. And what you're describing sounds like less of an issue of the technology working. It's more about the regulation over the technology. Are we comfortable enough that it will work in a high enough percentage time? And then when it doesn't work, what are the possible outcomes?
Or what's the litigation? I think the litigiousness of our society is, in a lot of ways, getting in the way of the innovation or bringing the innovation to the masses. Like the innovation's there. Yeah. And if they're able and are building safeguards that, in some way notify us. Right. When things aren't working. Or, working with an insulin pump that does have that kind of notification and it doesn't regularly notify, I realize that these things are imperfect. But I think as patients, as parents, we have to understand they're imperfect and put our own systems into place. Right. As opposed to no one being able to use it, maybe, again, taking on the responsibility and I don't know what it looks like yet. It's still an unknown.
It raises so many questions, like what's the role of government? What's the role of private industry? Who's responsible?
What's the role of the consumer?
Yeah. Who's responsible for death or serious illness? Right. So many people are anti-government regulation, but there are times where I think the regulation could really help here. And so tell me a little bit about your clean beauty advocacy, because that also comes into government regulation a bit. And it's something I've learned so much from you about. And as someone who's I'm wearing my bright pink lipstick that my sister got for me today, and I just put it on my lips. And we live in a world where I don't really have to think too much before I put that on my lips, whether that's right or wrong. So talk a little bit about that.
Right. So first of all, it's not wrong. And I think most of us assume that the things we are putting on our skin are regulated, that there's someone overseeing it and making sure that the products that we use every day are safe. Unfortunately, the last federal law that was passed around this was 1938. And, whereas other countries, say the EU, for example, is banning over 1,400 chemical ingredients, in America, it's only 11 are banned and 30 that are either banned or restricted use. In other words,
wow. Yeah. Wait, 11 versus 1,400?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So
okay, great.
And again, other countries are a little more preventative than we are. We're a little more reactive. We're a little more litigious, right? Like someone dies, we make a law,
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's other cases where that's not happening in America right now.
Yeah.
So, but we really protect industry first. And as I was saying to you earlier, like we've been on the other side of that too. So, my son's illness with diabetes, there is no cure. He will have it for a lifetime. But every 6 months, we have to update prescriptions. He has one particular medical device I was telling you has 3 parts. Each part needs a prescription.
Yeah.
It can't work without any one of those 3 component parts. So it can actually get in the way of us having, because insurance only allows you so much every 3 months, and to have to keep up on top of these things is pretty tough. So over-regulation really it can stifle innovation. It can make it harder for people to get what they need. But at the same time, having some rules is pretty necessary. And I am concerned about that when it comes to what we put on our skin. Because, for example, take everything that touches your kid's skin and put it on a table, or your whole family.
Yeah.
And because you're thinking to yourself, shampoo, conditioner, or whatever. Yeah. But it's bug spray, it's sunscreen, it's shave cream. It's like once you actually start looking around your house, you realize just how much you're using. And again, remember, Nicoderm patches, transdermal medication, our skin, it doesn't absorb everything. But it does absorb some, and a lot of things get into our bloodstream.
Well, I switched my kids to Beauty Counter sunblock for their faces when we go out. Because, we live in San Antonio, so every day they have a little something on their forehead and noses. Yeah. And so I switched them to that. I have that little stick that I bought from you. They love it because they think it smells great. So that's how they decide if they like a product. But I have friends that will ask me, like, oh, why do you put sunblock on them? And there's, there's multiple thoughts, like, on should we put sunblock on them at all? Should we let them have the natural sun? But you make some of the decision making really easy. Like, you're just straightforward. And you're like, hey, if you're going to use sunblock, use a healthy sunblock, right? Not everyone can afford that. And I think that's another problem with it not becoming mainstream. So I love that you and your team are always talking about advocating so that these things become normal. Right. And there isn't that cheap, unhealthy option.
Right. So, I mean, just to go back, you did ask me about Beauty Counter. Beauty Counter is not my business. I consult for the group. The company was founded by a woman named Greg Renfrew. We're very mission oriented, and we're very education first. And we're making very high performing alternatives that are safer by design. Yeah. So, like you saying that your kids use a sunblock because they like it. There are a lot of safer options on the market, but a lot of people won't use them because there's something about it they don't like. And my family is the perfect example. My husband's a melanoma survivor, and he's really picky about what sunscreens he'll use. He does, this one's too white, this one feels funny, this one smells funny, this one I don't like rubbing so hard. Whatever it is, right? So it's like, you want to give people the performance that they're expecting, right? But you also want it to be made safer. Sure. Again, to the best of what we know with science right now. So that's the idea. And it's the same thing with like skin creams or lipstick or whatever. If it doesn't work or it isn't, the product you want, you're not going to use it. Yeah. So,
okay, so what kind of deodorant do you use? Because I tried like 12 different all-natural deodorants. And I figured out what worked for me, only to find out that for my 13-year-old, it wouldn't work for her.
I'm not kidding. Deodorant is the hardest one because when it fails spectacularly. Yeah. I feel like that has been something I've said over and over again. Failing spectacularly. Yeah. And with my body, it was a process, man. Yeah. Like, I had to just not use the deodorant with aluminum for over a year before my body started responding positively. Yeah. But I also realized I kind of stank more with that because it was like the fragrance on top of my own BO. Yeah. Is this stuff we talk about here? I guess it's stuff we talk about.
We talk about everything. It's no holds barred. Okay. And whatever you're going to share, people have been wondering because we get a lot of messages where they're like, oh my gosh, can you talk more about that? And I'm like, really? Okay.
I mean, this is the one thing. And you know what? Because this is such a hard nut to crack, Beauty Counter is not even attempting it. Like, I don't think we have a deodorant coming out anytime soon. Because we also have a great return policy, and we know. Yeah. But I also have a baking soda allergy. Like, because of my eczema, if I use something like, there's nothing unsafe about baking soda.
Some people have an allergy to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it causes me to get like flare-ups of my eczema. And then I'm back on steroids. It's terrible. Oh, no. So I use, it's funny, it's called Lil Sensitive Pit Cream by Fat in the Moon.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get it on
Interesting
Amazon.
name.
Or
Okay.
I think it's called Fat in the Moon. You just have to try things out until you find the one that works for you. It just kind of stinks that, literally, that you have to keep, you know, sorting through it and buying a thing. And you often can't return things like deodorant.
And then we're women and our bodies are changing like different parts of the month. We're different. And then I went to Costa Rica with my all natural deodorant. But I went there and I had like a little, I had primal pit paste, which was one that worked well with me. And I had to mix it with charcoal. And I was in the rainforest and I was like sweating, you know, my head's sweating and everything's sweating. And my husband was like, do you want me to get you degree? I'm like, that's hurtful, babe. That's really hurtful.
But honestly, you know what? Here's the thing.
We're on vacation.
We're on vacation, or you do what you need to do. Like I have obviously, like with my whole campaign for reducing, you know, our toxic exposures where we can. Again, not perfectly, just where we can. You know, my husband has, you know, begrudgingly taken on some natural deodorants that he, for the most part, dislikes. But you know, he'll admit it. Like if he knows he has a big presentation or something big coming on, he'll use his regular deodorant because, like, you kind of need to, right? Yeah. If you're going to exude confidence, you know, like, and I think that's okay. I think it's you're gonna just try things out, find things that work for you. Right. Just it's knowing better and trying to do better. Yeah. And when it comes to like even hand soap, think about how many times you're washing your hands, or hopefully our kids are washing their hands. We don't really know. Yeah. But things like, you know, things that you're coming into contact with every day. Sunscreen is another thing because you apply it a lot. Yes. And one thing that I just want listeners to know, and you can look it up because the FDA has just been releasing information. They know that they need to do more research on sunscreen because we're using it so much. Right. And they've found that there are chemical ingredients in chemical sunscreen that are getting into our blood system even after one use. Mm-hmm. So they are recommending zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, so mineral-based sunblocks. Okay. Zinc oxide is both UVA and UVB. I'm not a dermatologist. I'm not an expert, so go ahead and just definitely do the reading. But it sits on the surface of the skin and it bounces rays back. Okay. So trying to find one of those, it's also not going to cause as much environmental damage because we know that things like oxybenzone are they're damaging coral reefs and having an effect on marine life, not just when we swim in the ocean, but this is really gross. It's like pee. It comes out of our bodies and gets into waterways. So, you know.
And then we later fish those areas and then we end up ingesting it. So it's important. Right on. It's important not just for the beautiful coral reefs that their health is our health. We learned that about 30 years ago. They start dying, we start dying. That's fantastic. That's great insight. And zinc oxide is the stuff we use like for diaper rashes, right? It creates a little protective barrier.
It sounds right. Yeah? Okay. It's been like 10 years since I've had a baby. So,
tell me about your bedtime routine. What's it like?
Similarly, he likes to say goodnight about 12 times. Okay. It's funny because the other thing is he walks around in a robe. He's got a bathrobe. And it has like skulls on it, so I guess it's like a tough bathrobe. Okay. And he's got to go fill a water bottle and then come back. He's got to brush his teeth, and then he comes out, and then he's got to go unplug his Kindle or like whatever. He just keeps flitting in and out. We're like, come on, just get, you know. Yeah. So he finally gets in bed.
We want to watch Game of Thrones. Like, get out of here.
Or just, you know, I need to shut off. Well, the thing is, I never really shut it off, but I need a little bit of a break, right? Because I know I'm going to tune back into blood sugar in another 2 hours. So I feel like I have this window to watch TV and just like, you know, not just be for a second. Just look at my husband and be like, hi, how are you? Like, you know, looking forward to that. So he gets into bed. He's in the top bunk. And usually it's my husband. It's only when he's not around do I get to be the kitty thrower. But he has a small stuffed animal, not a real cat, just a stuffed animal named Fudgy. Okay. And someone has to throw the cat at his face. I don't know where that came from. I'm pretty sure it's just something Sam started, and now he needs a cat thrown at his face.
Before he goes to bed?
Before he goes to bed. And then we both say different things. I say what my parents said to me when I went to sleep at night. I say, you know, good night, sweet dreams, dream of angels. Okay. My parents always said dream of angels. Aww. And then my husband, I guess he couldn't say dreams, and he would say sweet beans when he was a kid. So he always says sweet beans. So then the whole thing always ends with, like, you know, as we're walking away, I hear him, and he says it in this sing-songy voice. He's like, good night, and sweet beans, and all those other things we say at night. And he says it just like that. And it's like a weird voice.
Every night?
Every night.
The angels are already visiting him, maybe. Oh, that's so cute. Okay, my little one has a funny thing that she's like I'm going to say addicted to, because she really needs it. When she was a baby, we co-slept. And so she's really used to contact, right? And she's a third. So she slept with her sister, slept with her brother over the years. You know, they had bunk beds. She would sneak down and just sleep with them because she likes to have someone else there. So last year, she got her own room, and she's had a really hard time falling asleep on her own. So I started having her listen to these, SickNet has a radio station called Stories for Children, and they're just like great little sick stories about the gurus or about just being a good person, you know, according to Sikh ideology, and she listens to that. And I started that on my phone when I had to read to the other two kids. Like maybe we're reading a book and we needed to finish a chapter, and so I'd be like, okay, will you listen to this, and then I'll come and snuggle with you, and she'd fall asleep listening to it. She is really used to that. And every night she'll like, can you turn on SickNet? She needs it. And even if she falls asleep in a second, if she doesn't have that on, she's just like, no, I just want to listen to it for a second. And she's like really like wants to listen to those stories. And they're like animated stories as well. She's just listening to them. She's not looking at them. I donate to them because I'm like, please don't shut this off.
I know. We actually need you at night, your voice. Like, keep talking.
Yeah. But it's so cute what they get like attached to, right? You know, I have a sense of like our own mortality. And it really started for me when my parents had gone through like some difficult health times over the last few years. Like, we're not going to be here forever. I always tell my kids, this sounds terrible, but I tell my kids, me and your dad aren't going to be here forever. You guys have each other and you really rely on each other. And then I tell them at night, like, wherever you go with all of my good wishes for your, you know, happiness. So I tell them that. And when I say it, they go like, we know, we go with all your good wishes. Yes, because you're my heart. And they say, you're my soul. And I say, you're my pride. And they say, you're my joy. Oh. So we say it back and forth to each other. And it's become the norm, you know. I don't think it's special to them really anymore. But hopefully when they get older, they'll have a story like you or they'll tell their kids those things and just know that they're like really loved.
Yeah. I mean, that one, I'm sitting here tearing up. I'm like, oh my God. Like, here I was thinking like, good night, sweet beans was cute. But damn, that's awesome.
No, but that's the angels, I can't compete with angels.
It's hard to compete with angels.
It is. We don't have angels in Sikhism. You know, this is the problem. Like, sometimes people are like, oh, you know, this whole idea of like, oh, we're going to go to hell. And I'm like, what's it like? Because our people don't know, you know?
Well, that is the downside of the angels is the whole hell thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to call on our ancestors whenever we need them, right? Oh, man, this has been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
For any of our listeners that want to know more about Beauty Counter or some of the research that you mentioned, we'll link it in the episode notes. And we'll also have lots of information on our Facebook page. We'll continue to be up to date on whatever we can. And tell us what you think. How did you like this episode? Share your thoughts. And as always, thanks for listening.